Okay, so we're diving into 2 Nephi 5 today.
All right.
You know that story about the skin of blackness?
Right.
Well, get ready, because we're looking at it in a whole new way.
It's interesting.
We're using some pretty cool scholarship for this deep dive.
Okay.
Excerpts from an academic text, actually.
Uh-huh.
And it connects this familiar Book of Mormon story to something much bigger.
I see.
That's the idea of wandering.
Yeah, most people, when they read this passage,
Yeah,
they just focus on the whole skin color thing.
right.
But this source wants us to look beyond that,
Okay.
to see how it all connects to this bigger story,
That makes sense.
a narrative that goes all the way back to the beginning of the Bible.
Wow.
It's a recurring theme.
So instead of getting stuck on like the literal interpretation of skin color,
Yep,
we're going to explore this idea of wandering.
exactly.
I'm really curious to see where this takes us.
Well, you probably already know
Yeah.
that Lehi, Ishmael, and their families,
Hmm.
they were all descendants of Joseph,
Okay.
which basically means
Yeah.
the Nephites and Lamanites were all one big family.
One big family.
Yeah, to understand that better.
Yeah.
We got to know what the house of Joseph means.
Okay.
It's all the descendants of Joseph,
Uh-huh.
specifically his two sons,
Okay.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right.
Now, Lehi descended from Manasseh
Okay.
and Ishmael from Ephraim.
So that kind of changes things.
Well, yeah,
It challenges the idea that the skin of blackness
right.
was like some racial curse.
Exactly.
I mean, after all, they were all family.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the text,
Yeah.
it suggests the change in skin color.
Uh-huh.
It was more likely the result of lifestyle changes.
Oh, interesting.
Remember what it says about the Lamanites?
I see.
They lived in tents and wandered about in the wilderness.
Right. It makes sense if you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Living off the land, hunting all the time,
Hmm.
always moving around.
It definitely affects your appearance.
Especially compared to the Nephites. They built homes, farmed, a more settled life.
Exactly.
So their lifestyle was totally different.
And that contrast is really important here.
Ugh.
But what's even more interesting is how this story,
Yeah.
how it connects to a pattern we see throughout the whole Bible.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Right.
What pattern are we talking about here?
Okay, so over and over again, we see this dynamic
Yeah.
where the older brother,
Uh-huh.
he's usually kind of rebellious
Yeah.
or doesn't care about spiritual things,
Okay.
and he's cursed to wander.
Interesting.
Like he's sent into spiritual exile.
Like Cain and Abel.
Yes, Cain is a perfect example.
Okay.
And it's interesting because the land he wanders to,
Yeah.
it's called Nod,
Uh-huh.
which literally means wandering in Hebrew.
Wow. So it's like,
It's powerful, like
Yeah.
his inner state
Uh-huh.
of being lost and separated from God.
yeah.
It's reflected in the name of the place itself.
That's amazing.
So this curse isn't just about like physical punishment. It's more about spiritual unrest.
So being lost.
Yes.
Spiritually.
Exactly.
Not just physically wandering around.
That's it.
Okay.
And think about it.
Yeah.
Abraham and Lot, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau,
Right.
even Joseph and his brothers,
Wow.
and then their descendants,
Mm-hmm.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
That same pattern keeps going.
It continues, yeah.
So Laman and Nephi,
Yeah,
they're kind of carrying on that tradition.
exactly. And just like those other examples, they inherit this struggle.
As descendants of Manasseh and Ephraim.
Exactly.
So their story isn't just some random event.
Yeah.
It's part of this bigger story.
It's part of this huge saga
Wow.
of spiritual wandering,
Okay.
but also the potential for returning.
That's interesting.
Even people destined for greatness,
Mm-hmm.
they experience this wandering.
You mean like being outside the covenant?
Yeah, at least for a time.
Like Ishmael.
Perfect example.
He's promised to become a great nation,
Right.
but he ends up in the wilderness of Paran,
Yeah, becoming an archer.
a hunter, a nomad.
Exactly.
Okay, so this curse of wandering,
Right.
it's not always a final judgment.
No, it's often a period of separation and testing.
But there's always that chance to come back,
The potential for redemption.
finding your way back.
Exactly.
So maybe that's how we should see Laman and Lemuel.
Yeah, in a new light.
Okay.
And to understand this symbolism of skin color,
Yeah.
the source uses the Song of Solomon
Okay.
to show how skin color was often symbolic.
Really?
Yeah, in ancient texts.
Huh. The Song of Solomon.
Yeah, it's
What does that have to do with all of this?
Well, in the Song of Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
the woman describes herself as black
Okay.
because she's been working in the sun,
I see.
and she compares herself to the tents of Kedar.
Now, who were the Kedarites again?
Oh, they were nomadic descendants of Ishmael.
Right.
Their tents were made of black camel hair,
Okay.
and they lived in the desert.
So their skin was darker?
Yeah, it became linked to their lifestyle.
Makes sense.
from always being out in the element.
So like the Lamanites,
Exactly.
their physical appearance, their skin color, it was influenced by their lifestyle.
By their choices.
Wasn't about race.
Right.
It was about how they lived.
Exactly.
Wow.
It helps us see how ancient writers used symbolism to show deeper truths.
So it's not just about literal skin color.
Nope.
It's representing something more.
A spiritual state.
That's fascinating.
So if we connect this back to the Nephites and Lamanites, it might not be about a racial divide at all, but a spiritual one.
It's more about what happens when you separate from God. Like you're choosing to wander spiritually.
Exactly.
This changes how I see this whole story.
And there's also this hope for reunion. For finding your way back.
Back to the covenant path.
Yeah, this idea of reunion. It pops up all over Scripture.
You're talking about the prophecy in Ezekiel?
Yeah.
The one about the stick of Ephraim and the stick of Judah.
Becoming one stick.
Yeah, symbolizing the house of Israel coming together.
Exactly. Bringing everyone back together.
The people who've been scattered.
Yeah, and divided.
And Ephraim represents the descendants of Joseph.
Which means?
It includes both the Nephites and the Lamanites.
So it all ties back to their story.
This prophecy is like looking into their future.
Absolutely. It's foreshadowing their return.
To righteousness.
And becoming one people again.
So this whole idea of reunion, of finding your way back, how can we apply that today?
That's a great question.
Like to our own lives.
It's easy to get caught up in the details of these stories.
Yeah.
And miss the bigger picture.
The deeper meaning.
Exactly. You can wander through life aimlessly.
Chasing things that don't really matter.
Yeah, caught up in yourself.
Disconnected.
And when that happens,
you feel that unrest.
That separation.
Spiritually.
Exactly.
So we need to recognize that in ourselves.
Yeah. See those patterns?
And spiritual wandering.
Those moments when we've strayed from the path.
When we've let ourselves become separated.
From God.
And from each other.
And then we have to make a choice.
To turn things around.
To choose reunion.
Yeah.
To cultivate those qualities.
That bring us closer.
To God and to each other.
That might mean changing our priorities.
A relationship.
And we spend our time on.
Like you need to take a look around.
Yeah.
See where you're wandering.
And make sure it's the right direction.
Exactly. You got to be intentional.
With our choices.
Remembering that we have the power.
To choose a different path.
Always.
So how does all of this change how we see the Nephites and Lamanites?
It's not about a racial divide. It's a cautionary tale.
Like a warning.
About what happens when we let pride and jealousy in.
And hatred.
It's a reminder that we could make those same mistakes.
As individuals.
And as a society.
That separation and division can happen to anyone.
If we're not careful.
But it's also a story of hope.
It reminds us that no matter how far we stray.
There's always a way back.
To unity. To reconciliation.
And that path leads through Christ.
Through his teachings.
Of love, forgiveness, and compassion.
Absolutely.
So the main takeaway from this deep dive...
Is that the so-called curse?
In 2 Nephi 5?
It's not really about skin color.
It's about this pattern of separation.
This spiritual wandering.
That's been with us since the very beginning.
But within that pattern...
There's always that potential for a redemption.
We're finding our way back to unity.
To becoming whole. Even without physical wandering.
Exactly. It really makes you think.
Yeah, you can be surrounded by everything and still feel empty. Like you're missing something.
We often think of wandering as like a physical thing.
Yeah.
But really, it's a state of heart.
You can be there physically.
Right.
But lost spiritually, just going through the motions.
Without a purpose.
Or feeling like you belong.
Exactly.
So how do we know if we're wandering spiritually?
That's a good question.
Like, what are the signs?
Well, it's different for everyone.
Right.
But some common ones.
Yeah.
Feeling dissatisfied.
Okay.
Like all the time.
Chronically unfulfilled.
Even when things seem good.
Yeah. On the surface, you might find yourself chasing after things that don't last.
Fleeting pleasures.
Or always needing approval from others. Because no matter how far we wander, we still have that desire for connection.
That need for something more. For meaning. For something bigger than ourselves.
It's always there.
Deep down.
So how do we stop running?
Well, the good news is we don't have to do it alone. Just like in those stories, there's a path back.
A way to return.
To that wholeness, that connection.
And that path leads through Christ.
It does.
How so?
His teachings.
Okay.
Love, forgiveness, compassion.
Right.
They can help us realign our hearts.
With what really matters.
Shifting our focus.
Okay.
Away from selfish things. Towards a life of service.
And connection. So it's not just about avoiding the wilderness.
No.
It's about what we learn from it.
Exactly.
Letting those experiences change us.
Refine us.
Bring us closer to God.
Those times of spiritual wandering, as tough as they are, they can be the most transformative.
Really?
They teach us about ourselves, about our need for God.
And about choosing to turn back. This has given me a lot to think about.
It's amazing.
How a new perspective on a familiar story can change everything.
It reminds us that Scripture is alive.
It's always speaking to us.
In new ways.
If we're listening.
Sometimes the deepest truths.
Yeah.
They're hidden beneath the surface.
Just waiting to be discovered.
This deep dive has been fantastic.
Thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.
It's been eye-opening.
Remember.
Okay.
The journey doesn't stop here.
Right.
Keep exploring. Keep asking questions.
Keep searching.
You never know what you might find.